Beatriz and Terry Sheldon, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's my pleasure to be here too.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad to have you two here. Just to give, well, I can't help but notice that you two share the same last name. What can you tell us about that?
What can we say about that?
We've been married for 17 years, and we've had the privilege of working together in many capacities. This office that we're sitting in, we share together, and we've worked on this book together. We started doing research together 15 years ago, and it just goes on. There's so much.
I'll tell you, you guys would have to have a very strong bond to get through all of that and still be together.
Yes, and still be together and liking each other, which is
yeah, I can only imagine. And so the people know a little bit about your background. Beatriz, you have a master's degree in education, and Terry, you're an MD.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to the story than that, but that's just the bare bones.
Right.
People can go to the Shrink Wrap Radio website and see a more complete biography. Now, the two of you have been working for years, first developing and then applying and training folks in a system you call complex integration of multiple brain systems in therapy. What a mouthful that is. And you've written a book by the same title. And speaking of the mouthful, you have made a acronym that we all can use to refer to it, which is SIMS. Am I saying that right?
You're saying it right.
Okay, great. So maybe you can tell us the story of how all this has come about.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. I have a master's degree in psychology and education.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And then a specialization after that in McGill.
Okay, so that makes sense.
In short-term dynamic psychotherapy.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Do you have the answer to that question?
No, that's your thing. You're good at talking about that, how we got going.
So what we were discovering during our therapies is that we were doing a different therapy than our colleagues, and our patients were getting faster, better, faster, and they were able to finish therapy, and not just finish therapy, but finish therapy like 5 years after, when we will bring them back again and see what is happening with them. They were in a different trajectory. They were continuing growing after therapy, which I used to be like, the therapy they'll finish therapy and then they'll come back, and because they needed a booster, right?
Yeah.
And here our patients were just in a different trajectory, continuing success. In therapy also, it was being very fast, our therapy, and they were becoming our co-therapists. And instead of being avoidant, they were being in approach. And so we were wondering, like, what is this that we are doing differently?
Yeah. What do you do?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So we started studying our videos, and we will see a 50-minute video. It will take us 4 hours to look at the video without sound, so we will not get distracted by the narrative.
Yes.
We'll just see the reactions on the body, and what was the reaction when I get closer to the patient, and what is the physiological reaction that is happening, that they become more approaching their difficulties rather than avoiding the difficulties. So, and then we started working with what is happening, what are the neurotransmitters that are happening here that it's making this patient more more staying in their own capacity, and growing faster. And we were studying all the neurophysiology and the science of the brain to understand what is it that we are doing. Now you can pick it up from here.
We were reading a lot of the up-to-date neuroscience, neurobiological research, and we're just really fascinated by that, wondering how can we apply this? How can we use this in our clinical work? So we started, kind of experimenting with what we were learning to say, well, how does this apply? How does this apply? And so we were then using that research, what we were observing and saying, how do we make sense of this?
Yeah.
And noticing how different patients responded differently to the same intervention, where they were at in understanding their symptoms. So what became clear and clear to us is that our nervous system, our emotional nervous system, operates with many different systems. And as we come to understand that, then we can be more precise, both in our interventions and say, I think, their seeking system, their drive to learn and to grow and be curious is really inhibited. And whenever I invite them to be curious, they become afraid. Or another example is when I invite them to feel safe, they hold their breath. How do I make sense of that?
Yeah.
We started experimenting with that and said, okay, there are these different systems. And as we work with them individually, they become sources of energy, sources of processing capability, wisdom, and then things really move along, and the patient becomes accessing more of their kind of innate biological capabilities, potential that has been suppressed by anxiety or depression or some trauma at a higher level in the nervous system. So we found ourselves really working with, the brainstem and the peripheral nervous system, the body, and engaging that in our work with our patients, and they would walk out the door feeling energized with
Yeah,
in their
that's
step.
great. Yeah. My initial reaction was, does the world really need another psychotherapy? There's so many out there, and with all sorts of claims. But as I got into your book, I realized that this is not, there's a way in which it's a new psychotherapy, I suppose, in terms of some of the extraordinary results that you're talking about. But really, it's a grand integration, as you were talking about all the neuroscience that's out there now and other approaches to therapy that are utilizing that neuroscientific information. And so I think you've really got your hands around something here. You grabbed a tiger, right? Because what you discovered was this book is not your first attempt to write about it, right? You really have struggled. How do you communicate this to other people? And I understand the challenge, because you identify 20 emotional subsystems in the brain. And so given how complex the organ of the brain is, I suppose it's not reasonable to expect for it to be really simple.
Right.
And so I think what you've developed is a very complex view that's hard to communicate. And but I think I got it. I mean, going through your book, I really got the feel for it. It's been my privilege to interview a number of the people that you mentioned drawing upon, like Dan Siegel, Stephen Porges, Jack Panksepp, who unfortunately is no longer with us, Joseph Ledoux, and Richard Davidson. So I can see where you're drawing from.
Mm-hmm.
And you also encountered considerable resistance from other therapists. Let's talk about that. Tell us about that.
All right. Well, let me speak to that. When we first started to present our work, we thought we show videos of our clinical work and talk about it and explain it. and they wouldn't get it. It was sufficiently different, and they could see some of the patients struggle to work with their difficulties, and they weren't able to recognize what we were doing to facilitate the progress of the session and how things were happening. They didn't have a search pattern for what we were reading.
You have to know what to look for to see it.
Exactly. So it's important to help them come to see that there's a lot of psychophysiology about what's happening in the non-conscious emotional systems that can then key us into how to respond. And so if, for example, I was inviting the patient to feel safe, and they held their breath. So I adjusted the process to deal with the fact that this person doesn't feel safe.
Right.
And some of the participants would not get that at that point. So we've learned how to teach it in a different way, where it really tease it apart, go much more slowly, and help them get to see what are these subtle, observable, empirical pieces of information, the psychophysiological phenomenon that you can watch, pay attention to and say, okay, what is this? What is that?
Yeah.
So if the patient suddenly sits up a little bit, oh, hold on to that, because it's not going to last. So let's see what just shifted that the patient's now sitting up instead of being slumped in their chair. Right. Something adaptive has happened, and it's not conscious. They're not aware of it. And I can pick up on that. And so it took a while to be able to teach our colleagues what to look for, because they weren't trained that way.
And I applaud you for using video in that way, in that sort of micro video approach, which takes courage, I think, to put your work out there in that way. You're opening yourself up to possible criticism and so on. And I would imagine that initially, maybe before you were showing people videos, there was probably some criticism or dismissal, these claims are extravagant, how can this be what you're saying? And one of the phrases that helps with that, I think, is you talk about mindsets, that people need to have alternate mindsets, that they come into it, a whole set of, which is natural.
Sure.
I've learned some system and new information. Once I'm a true believer, which we tend to be, grab hold of a system and hang on to it for dear life. And letting in new learning is challenging, I think, to all of us.
It is.
And but you guys were persistent, and you're working with the emotional brain. And one of the things I noticed is you use the word non-conscious and not the unconscious. And there must be some reasoning behind that. So.
Yeah, there is reason behind that.
The non-conscious is a more precise term, and unconscious has a bunch of different meanings. If you're talking to an analyst, they think of the non-conscious in a certain way. As a physician, I think of someone who's unconscious in a different way. So it's a more ambiguous term, but non-conscious is the terminology that people like Jack Panksepp works with, or Antonio Damasio. These are non-therapists that are neuroscientists. So they're talking about emotional phenomenon that are transpiring in the brainstem, right, the peripheral nervous system. Those will never be conscious, just like you'll never know all the things your body's doing when you write a letter.
Right.
Micro, coordinations that you do. We'll never know that. We don't need to know that.
Right.
But there's all this going on underneath the surface. And so helping to realize that most of the emotional systems are non-conscious. I mean, Jacques Panksepp's research was so helpful to us in understanding what we were observing.
Yeah.
Observing now, now that's why this is different from that. This is going on. And even though neither one of us can understand it completely, we can trust that there's a lot of important, valuable energy and power in those non-conscious systems.
Yeah.
And we have learned that by paying attention to these non-conscious systems and the activation of this system, that it activates and then it goes up and then it comes down and it disappears. But we have learned that if we pay attention to the activation of the system and we keep it going a little click more and a little bit more, we will be able to help this patient to get out of their depression, to get out of the, for example, this woman that I'm working with, postpartum depression, she wasn't able to enjoy her baby, which she was very sad that she wasn't able to enjoy her baby. And as we are working together, she had a little smile, depressed, but she had a little smile. So I picked up on the smile, that reaction. In the past, I would have thought that smile is anxiety or it's shame or something else. But I picked up the smile and I was asking, what this smile is about? And she was saying, well, it's kind of a little bit funny to see the makings of my mind, isn't it? So here it is. There's a little bit of play here. There's a little bit of funny. Can we just stay here in this funny, in this a little bit of pleasure, paying attention to it, one click more. And by repetition, we know now, neuroscience tells us that the repetition will recruit more neurons from other adjacent neurons. And this recruiting of these more neurons will build this resilient brain system that has been repressed by shame, anxiety, guilt, etc. So then little by little, she was able to feel more playfulness, more feeling good about her child, and enjoy pleasure, feeling pleasure about her child little by little. And this was, we know now that, and she realized at one moment, like, oh, my mother used to be depressed and postpartum depression, and she would be angry at me because I was making noises or I was having fun. And that realization was very important for her because she was saying, I'm doing the same thing to my child. And yet, knowing that realization, still, she will realize that that is happening, but it will not change anything because she will keep on just realizing every time or afterwards, oh, I did it again. But what we are doing here, that's why it's a new way of working and a new paradigm. We are doing physiotherapy for the brain. We're sculpting neural networks in the brain to differentiate them from for the trauma from the past. By staying here, experiencing the sensations of the neurophysiological sensations. And that is what happens with our patients and why they keep on growing and changing fast and finishing therapy, like really finishing therapy.
Would you say this is a short-term approach to therapy or not?
It depends on the patient.
Because I know in the book, there was one place where you said that it's gone as fast as 20 minutes, sometimes a session. I don't know if that was a whole treatment.
Let me, can I answer that? Can I? This is a good time to say this. One of the things we've learned in teaching is that when we do live demonstrations where everybody is watching the session unfold, it's much more compelling than even a video, because then you're a part of it. And we can discuss it and tease it apart. But those demos are 20 minutes long, and we can all watch how in that 20 minutes, the person who is receiving it has a novel experience of themselves. In 20 minutes, we can see how it works. That's not a complete therapy by any means, but it shows that this, in a sense, this is short-term because it's a physiological therapy rather than a cognitive therapy. And and you can see the physiology, how the physiology of the precipitant or participant who's receiving this demonstration, and she's such an expert at doing these demos live, so courageous to do this. You never know what you're going to get.
Right.
There you are.
working without a net.
Without a net. You're just setting what you can. But when you work and when you trust the neurobiology of us as human beings and all these different emotional systems that are all, highly evolved, when you trust that, that, whatever you're going to uncover, you're going to be able to have resources inside your patient to work with. So, we've done hundreds of these demonstrations that are 20 minutes long, and you can watch how they work. Certainly, a therapy with a patient who's been chronically depressed isn't going to happen that quickly, but just knowing that in each session you can make a difference, and you can see the difference and trust the psychophysiology, even though the patient may not tell you, oh, that was a great session. You can see and trust the energy, all that healthy, loving energy that you directed to the core of this person. That energy doesn't disappear. I mean, that's what psychodynamics is all about, is that it adheres to the laws of thermodynamics. This is energy that we're directing to our patients on this level. It's going to have a beneficial impact, even though you can't necessarily see it.
Yeah, I hear you say directing loving energy. So I'm glad to hear that, because people could get the impression that this is so technical,
Oh, no.
as to remove that element of love and connection and all of that. And what I'm taking away so far is that you two have been adept at discovering and then in therapy utilizing this sense of the different systems that are there and the ability to kind of do interventions which will move a person appropriately out of one system, which might lead to a downward spiral into another system where they can access optimism, hope, past successes, etc.
And what is beautiful about doing this therapy is that we get to say caring out loud. We get to say, I care for you out loud, which is something that you don't say that before, right? And we get to be here with shiny eyes and pay attention in the connection of the relationship all the time. And we sit very close together.
I'm feeling it right now from you. The shiny eyes.
Exactly. The shiny eyes, it comes because there is caring and playfulness and excitement about being here in the relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And we do the same thing. And we have taught our therapists to stay here with shiny eyes in the connection of the relationship and to say out loud the caring feelings that are happening at this moment.
Yeah.
And clearly, you can feel the difference. I mean, you were just feeling it yourself a moment ago. And making that energetic focus to stay really present and connected together, and build that connection and trust that even if they're defensive and resistant, there's a part of them that really does want to connect with us. So keeping that attachment relationship, developing a therapeutic attachment relationship, and knowing that it will activate these very basic emotional systems from infancy of feeling safe, feeling care, feeling connected, being playful, and accessing those resources that are all in the brainstem. They're very, very powerful emotional systems. And being in this attachment relationship with our patients will activate those, and just know that they will activate them.
You used a couple of words there that I'd like to key in on. One is you said resistant. What is your view of the classical idea of resistance?
It's curious because we have different patients. When one of my psychiatrist friends referred me some patient, and then I get I asked the patient if my psychiatrist friend can see the video. My friend will say, he always will say, this is a different patient. This is not the same patient that I worked with.
Right.
And it is because we are working differently with the patient.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we end up not having too much resistance in the way of that, because we pay more attention to the capacities that are happening at this moment that will not activate too much resistance. What do you say about that?
Well, I think it's helpful to our understanding of the resistance is that, emotional learning, trauma and so forth has caused maybe an overreaction of the shame brain system or the fear brain system or the guilt brain system, and they're stuck there. And they can be really stuck, and that's how the resistance might present itself, is this chronic depression or this standoffishness or whatever it might be. And just understand, well, that's an emotional learning, and what we do to deal with it is to go underneath it and recognizing that the emotional learning is in the basal nuclei, in the amygdala, in the hippocampus. That's where that emotional learning has taken place. We want to work sort of underneath that.
And the brainstem. At
the bottom of the iceberg, working with the brainstem and the capacity for care and connection and play and seeking. And these are Panksepp's terms to describe and help access each of those different systems. And it's important to think that they're each different systems. So if you've got each of them going together in parallel, then things change. In the past, for this patient, their ability to, let's say, be play, like the Beatrice's patient she mentioned a moment ago, the play that might have come up with her little child got short-circuited by her feeling of shame and fear. So she couldn't continue to play. And so it was a short circuit. It's like things were wired in series. So it's like that circuit, the circuit breaker popped and she couldn't play anymore. But if we accept that that's a reality and say, okay, let's build parallel processing. Let's have other systems going. So even though we can't undo the fear and shame about what happened in the past, we can have all these other systems operating in the present that will override the past.
What are the systems? Play, connection,
safe, care, seeking, assertive. These brainstem systems that can then override the traumatic resistance or, shame learning,
right,
that would otherwise cause this person to, to shut down or withdraw or to shut you out.
And that's why therapy becomes faster.
Yeah, because you're working with some precision, right?
That's right. A lot of precision.
A lot of precision. It's interesting that you talk about working in the brainstem, because it just so happens that my last guest last week had written a book about 8 key centers in the brain, and had stories about each of those centers, but kind of admitted that as we got into the thalamus, kind of said, well, I don't know so much about the brainstem. There's a lot of research that needs to be done there still, which is interesting because you seem very confident about that. You're accessing that what would be called ancient materials.
Right. Yeah.
Genetically. Yeah.
I'd love to be able to discuss this with Jaak Panksepp. I'm sorry he's no longer with us, because I think he'd find the way we've applied his basic neuroscience research with mammals and these different emotional systems. I think he'd be very excited by what we've done with it.
Oh, I'm sure he would be. And, I was tempted well, I will ask you about your work with trauma, but I'm remembering a case in the book, and there are cases that you discuss in the book, and I want our viewers and listeners to know that you'll find that kind of material in the book. And you talk, because in my mind, one place I go is, well, what about the really dark stuff? Are you avoiding the really dark stuff? Isn't there a basic psychotherapeutic knowledge that people have to go there into the dark places to get better, and you can respond to that. But I'm thinking of a case that sort of comes to mind as an answer to that you told about a woman who was raped, Beatrice, that you worked with, I think, and somehow you got her to a place where well, you tell the story. You know the story.
I think I referred to a patient with rape rather than
okay.
hers.
Okay.
Anyway, so this woman had been in therapy for several years with another therapist after the rape to try to work it through, and had not had a lot of success. And so she moved to another community and ended up seeing me. So she had, identified the rape as something that was of some concern. And I said, okay, I get that history. I want to see what I can do to develop a healthy attachment and connection with this woman, to work with her relationship with me and then her relationship with herself. And we'll see what happens about the rape. And she clearly had some issues about developing connection and closeness that ended up being much earlier than the rape. It came from her early childhood. And as we worked through those feelings, the rape stopped being an issue. And a number of sessions, like maybe 3 or 4 sessions, I said, how are we doing? How's this going? And she said, this is so totally different. At the end of my previous therapy, we'd spend all this time talking about the rape, and I'd feel worse at the end of the session.
Yeah.
Now, every time we come in, I feel something new and hopeful about myself. So yes, there's all this trauma, and we focus on it somewhat, but it's mostly recognizing that if we go with the underlying resources, that the nervous system will update that traumatic memory. We are providing a form of neuroplasticity called emotional memory reconsolidation.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're providing that, constantly in the sessions. And so the healthy attachment that they're building with themselves and with us is updating the traumatic abuse that they may have suffered with their parents, because they're having a new experience. And that can be painful. We sometimes refer to our therapy as like going to see a physiotherapist, where the resistance is like a frozen joint. And we're asking this patient to start moving muscles and nerves in ways that they could never do before. And that's uncomfortable. It can be disorienting, it can be painful. And sometimes there's a release of grief or shame that can be quite uncomfortable for the patient and even for the therapist. And yet recognizing the trauma and the pain is not in the present, it's being released from the past. And so trusting that and realize, okay, this is part of the healing process.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in the stories, you kind of illustrated something that I was impressed by in the book, which is the go the other way. And I didn't know whether to call that a technique or a mindset. I think it's kind of a mindset, go the other way. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah.
You speak to that, because that's your phrase.
That's my phrase.
You develop that with your students.
Right. Well, I was taught that anxiety, let's pay attention to the anxiety. Shame, let's pay attention to the shame. And let's work with all that kind of stuff.
Right, right.
Reading neuroscience, I realized that what you pay attention to, you're sending blood to those synapses. So paying attention to the anxiety, we're reinforcing the synapses. We're sending blood to the synapses. So so then I realized, like, no, we're doing it wrong. Let's go the other way.
Yeah.
So my patient is feeling, if I ask my patient, well, what are your sensations right now? And my patient will say, I have the throat it's closing on me. My heart is pounding, tension in the chest. And so then I say, well, tell me what is happening right now inside of you? I'm really anxious. Are you aware that you are being anxious? And yes, I'm aware. So you are in awareness of yourself. And awareness is very important, that you are aware of the anxiety and not being in the anxiety. And then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I'm aware and not being in the anxiety. I feel the anxiety, but the anxiety is not taking over me.
Yeah.
Oh, and you being aware. And so can we stay here in the sensations of awareness and paying attention to you in this connection with you? And as we are going the other way of being aware of themselves, they're realizing that anxiety is over here, and they're able to just grow the awareness, grow the sensation of being stronger inside of themselves, and being able to feel better about
Yeah.
them.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, add more one thing.
We don't want to talk at once.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, add more one thing. One thing more.
Okay. Another approach when the patient is feeling that anxiety, as part of going the other way, is saying, what's happening here? What are you experiencing right now together with us? And it's often, oh, I'm feeling your care, I'm feeling your connection, and that's causing this, or that's causing my anxiety. They're recognizing that the closeness or the care or the connection is triggering fear, triggering shame, triggering unworthiness. And then those two different phenomenon can be differentiated. We're connecting together and it triggers shame or anxiety. So the awareness is one approach, working in the attachment relationship is another approach, is a way of going the other way.
I think there are other therapies that have tapped into some of the things that you're talking about, but not with the same precision of awareness of why it was working or how it was working. One thing that was coming to mind was the work of Milton Erickson, the famous hypnotherapist. I see you nodding your head, so you're familiar with him. And people would come in with a complaint, but he would start telling a story that would totally divert them from the thing that they came in with, and somehow they would get better. And I'm sure he could not have articulated it in the way that you guys are able to articulate it. And I'm thinking of other approaches that as a young therapist, I was always looking for, what's the latest thing, and was interested in the notion that maybe you didn't have to go into the deep darkness to get better. And psychosynthesis seemed to be an approach that at a symbolic level, get people working in imagination, and that they could go to evoke a strong sense of their spirit and potential and all of that. So I think that everything that you're saying in terms of the kinds of experiences that therapists have had resonates and makes sense. I think pieces of what you're saying, oh yes, I've heard this piece over here or this piece over there. But again, I come back to the strength of your integration, and you're rooting it in brain processes. And so I think that's just
and
so.
Neuroscience.
And what?
Neuroscience.
Yeah. And anchoring it in neuroscience, but also using your own humanity in that.
Our own relationship.
Yeah.
And attachment.
Yeah.
And what is fantastic is that we're able to teach it to our students, and it's reproducible. It's not just because I am this or he is that, or it's reproducible. Each of our students, they're able to not have a waiting list that it's closed. They're able to move through their therapies, and they are enjoying their therapies.
Do your students have an aha experience? It sounds like they might.
Every time.
every time. Yeah. Yeah. So there must be this experience of delight, of
Yes.
It is.
at last, I know what I'm doing.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
There's a number of them who are very senior therapists and said that have been so fascinated by what they've learned from working with us is they don't want to retire. They said, I used to think that I was going to retire at this point, but I'm enjoying my work so much more than I used to. I don't feel depleted at the end of the day.
Right.
I really enjoy what I'm doing. So I'm going to keep doing it because there's always new things to learn. So that
Well, that
is
being said,
gratifying.
all of that being said, I imagine we have therapists in the audience who might be saying, I wonder how I could get some training in this. So here's your chance to do an advertisement.
Well, the several things, and you add anything you want as we go. Certainly, now that the book is out, to pick it up, because it is designed to not just be a text. It's designed to help the reader work through actual transcripts that also include the psychophysiology, where you can get a sense of what it feels like. And even our editor, when he would read the transcript, it would bring tears to his eyes because he could have a felt sense of what was transpiring in these transcripts. So that the book is really helpful. And yet it needs to be read slowly, just a few pages at a time, because there's a lot there.
That's true.
Let it sink in, and then go out and practice with it. And then go back and read some more, or go back and read those pages again, because you'll see them differently. So that's not available to obviously a wide audience. We also have, we've been doing weekend trainings where we'll meet with a group of 30 therapists for a couple of days, and it's a very experiential learning. So we've had those video recorded for a number of years, and so you could get an online training. And again, if one of the listeners, gets that online training, to go slowly, to don't just run through it like you might with some other presentation, to go slowly and pick it up, and then go back and look at it again, because there's a lot of experiential learning taking place. It's not so much didactic. It's mostly experiential, and getting a felt sense in your own body. I mean, that's one of the instructions we give to all of our participants is let yourself be moved. You may not like what you see. It may make you uncomfortable. It may make you say, I don't get it, or whatever, but listen to that, because it's touching you. And we want to help the reader or the participants be moved and learn from the inside out. Their strengths and their constraints. Go ahead.
What about this COVID, by the way? I'm hearing that you've got a lot of online resources, and has COVID limited your teaching possibilities, or how's it impacted your work?
That's a very good question. We found out that we are able to work with online training first, but also doing the Zoom in the therapy, we are able to also change and work really deeply through Zoom. Although it's a cold media, if we are connected together and we get closer into the camera and work with our hands and work with the relationship, we are able to do Zoom, and therapy goes very well.
Wow.
One of the important things, if a therapist wants to learn more about this, read the book for sure. Watch the training courses that we have. We also give small training courses once a month, and very important to try at least one session via Zoom or via Zoom if it's necessary, but one therapy session. So then they can feel this kind of therapy, this new
Yeah.
paradigm that we could say in their own feelings, in their own bodies. At least just one.
Where is the website where people can find these resources and ways to be in touch with you?
It's called Complex Integration MBS.
What's the MBS stand for?
Multiple brain system.
Okay.
But they can just Google my name, Beatriz Sheldon, Beatriz Sheldon,
Yeah.
or Terry.
Albert.
Albert. Terry's his Albert Sheldon. Just to Google the name Albert Sheldon, they'll arrive to the website.
Okay. And there's one other thing I was going to ask you about, which is the role of homework and practice.
Go ahead.
Because I think Terry, you actually kind of touched on that when you were saying that it's not just going to, big issues aren't going to clear up in just one session.
And these, so we're very, very much aware of that. So at the end of our sessions, every session, we spend some time looking at what was unique, what was different, what was a felt sense that was special today. And so for the next 15 minutes, work with that feeling, hold on to that, go for a walk, because physical exercise releases dopamine, which will help them hold on to that emotional learning,
To the newness.
that they had, and then invite them to refresh it that night before they go to sleep, to refresh that neural circuit so that it gets reinforced again and again and again, because new learning often will be deleted when we're asleep.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of repetition. We add play and curiosity, because those two emotional systems release a lot of dopamine, and they will also facilitate the holding on to the learning. So that's why it's important. This learning is mostly experiential, so that it lasts, because you could have a great insight, but that's going to have a limited impact. But if they have a new visceral experience of themselves and choose to exercise it again between sessions, it'll be that much stronger. And when they come in for the next session, they're in a new place.
They're a different person.
And we go from there.
Wow. Wow. Well, all of this truly is exciting, I must say. And so Beatriz and Terry Sheldon, or Albert Sheldon, I want to thank you two for being my guests today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you for having us.
And my pleasure. It's been a pleasure to meet with you.